I set my coffee mug down on the kitchen counter and just listened. The acoustics in my San Diego home were funny that way. If you stood right by the refrigerator, you could hear everything being said in the front hallway. My son, Dennis, was standing by the front door, his girlfriend Stephanie right beside him. Both of them were talking in hushed, urgent tones about refinancing, equity, and reverse mortgages, like I wasn't even in the house. Like I hadn't just buried my wife 3 days ago. That night, after they finally stopped scheming and went back to their own apartment, I opened Margaret's hidden folder from the fireproof safe in my closet and called the lawyer in Wyoming about activating what my wife had called our absolute escape plan. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up so you can understand exactly how I got to this point and why I had to do what I did. My name is Richard Vance. I'm 67 years old, a retired fire captain from the San Diego Fire Department. I spent 32 years of my life running into burning buildings while everyone else was running out. I thought I had seen the worst of human nature and tragedy, but nothing prepares you for the betrayal of your own blood. My wife, Margaret, passed away 6 weeks ago from a long, grueling battle with heart disease. She was 65. We had been married for 41 incredible years. We have one son, Dennis. He's 39 years old and works as a corporate finance manager downtown. He's the kind of guy who measures success entirely by the brand of his watch and the balance in his bank account. Then there is my nephew, Tyler. He's 27, a freelance wildlife photographer. His mother was my younger sister, Susan, who tragically died in a horrific car accident when Tyler was just 8 years old. Margaret and I took him in and raised him alongside Dennis. To me, Tyler is just as much my son as Dennis is. That is the family tree. Keep it straight, because things are about to get very complicated. The day of Margaret's funeral was uncharacteristically gloomy for Southern California. It was February and the sky was a heavy slate gray that seemed to press down on everything. The local church was packed to the rafters. Margaret had been a pediatric nurse for 35 years before her heart forced her to retire, and this community adored her. She had delivered half the babies in our neighborhood and watched them grow into adults. I sat in the front pew, staring blankly at the casket. Tyler was on one side of me, his hand resting on my shoulder during the entire eulogy, steady, strong, and comforting. Dennis sat on my other side, spending the majority of the sacred service checking his phone, scrolling through emails, and firing off text messages like he had somewhere vastly more important to be. What I remember most vividly about that terrible day wasn't the beautiful service, the comforting prayers, or even the heartbreaking graveside ceremony. It was afterward at the house, during the reception. I was in the kitchen, brewing a fresh pot of coffee for the dozens of guests who had come to pay their final respects, when I heard Dennis talking to Stephanie in the hallway. They had absolutely no idea I was standing right there. This house has to be worth at least $1,200,000 in this current market, Stephanie was saying, her voice a low, eager whisper that made my stomach turn. And you said there is the pension, the life insurance, all that retirement money just sitting there doing nothing. Dad's pension is rock solid, around $4,500 a month, Dennis replied, his tone clinical and detached. Plus the $400,000 from Mom's life insurance policy. I checked the financial documents in his home office while he was at the viewing yesterday afternoon, found them right in his bottom desk drawer. I stood there, frozen, the hot coffee pot trembling in my hand. My own flesh and blood had been snooping through my private personal papers while I was weeping over his mother's casket. We need to move incredibly fast, though, Stephanie continued, her voice practically vibrating with greed. Get him to sign a reverse mortgage or some kind of aggressive equity release. With his age and the intense grief he is going through, he's not thinking straight. This is actually perfect timing. He's vulnerable. We can guide him into making the right choices for us. Give it a week, Dennis said smoothly. Let the funeral dust settle. Let him feel the emptiness of the house. Then we'll bring it up. Make it sound like we're helping him, looking out for his long-term future. He'll never see it coming. They didn't even give it a week. 3 days later, Dennis showed up unannounced at my front door with his slick business partner, Victor Lawson, and a thick leather binder full of complex financial paperwork. They had clearly been meticulously planning this ambush for a very long time. Dad, we really need to sit down and talk about your financial situation, Dennis said, spreading glossy documents across the dining room table like he was conducting a hostile corporate takeover. Victor here specializes in aggressive estate planning for seniors. We've been thoroughly reviewing your assets, and frankly, Dad, we are extremely concerned. I'm 67, Dennis, not 90, I told him, trying to keep the anger out of my voice. And I certainly didn't ask for any financial advice, especially not from your firm. You need to be realistic, Richard. Victor chimed in, leaning forward with a predatory smile. He had this infuriating way of speaking like he was doing you a massive favor while simultaneously picking your pocket. This house is 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms. The maintenance costs alone are probably draining your accounts. Property taxes in San Diego have skyrocketed in the last 5 years. You're bleeding cash. It's not about managing, Dad, Dennis said, slipping into his slick corporate finance voice, the exact tone he probably used with difficult clients who refused to take his predatory advice. It's about maximizing your stagnant assets. If you do a reverse mortgage right now, you could access over $600,000 in untaxed equity. You can keep living here, but you'll have massive cash reserves for retirement, unexpected medical bills, whatever comes up. And what exactly happens to the house when I die? I asked, crossing my arms. Dennis and Victor exchanged a quick, loaded look. It was one of those microscopic glances that told me they had already rehearsed this exact part of the pitch. Well, eventually the bank would take possession of the property, Victor said carefully, over-enunciating his words like he was explaining a simple math problem to a slow toddler. But you'd be long gone by then. And really, Dennis here would inherit whatever debt is left along with whatever equity remains. It takes the burden completely off you. There it was, the ugly, naked truth. Dennis desperately wanted to get his hands on the massive equity in my home right now, while I was still alive to sign the legal papers rather than wait for me to pass away and inherit it the normal way. He would get the cash immediately, and if there was a mountain of debt left over when I eventually died, well, that was a problem for future Dennis to ignore. I'm absolutely not interested, I said firmly. Stephanie, who had been sitting quietly, leaned forward and put on her most sickeningly sympathetic voice. Richard, honey, you have been through a major, devastating trauma. You are clearly not thinking logically right now. Margaret would absolutely want you to be smart about this, to legally protect your future and ensure Dennis is taken care of. Don't you ever dare bring my wife into this, I snapped, my voice cracking like a whip. Margaret is none of your business. Dennis held up his hands in a placating gesture, treating me exactly like a confused, senile old man. Dad, calm down. We are just trying to help you. This is what loving families do. They look out for each other. The breaking point arrived exactly 4 weeks after Margaret's funeral. I came home from picking up a few things at the grocery store to find Dennis, Stephanie, and Victor all sitting comfortably in my living room. Dennis had used his old emergency house key to let himself in. They were completely spread out on my furniture like they owned the place. Stacks of papers scattered across the coffee table, laptops open, looking very much like they were conducting official business in my home without my permission. We need to have a serious family meeting, Dennis announced the moment I walked through the door with my grocery bags. In my house? I said, without asking me first. Technically, it's going to be our responsibility soon anyway, Stephanie said smugly, not even bothering to look up from whatever spreadsheet she was typing on her expensive laptop. When you eventually can't handle it anymore. I set the heavy grocery bags down and looked at them. My own son, his gold-digging girlfriend, and his shady business partner sitting in the living room, where Margaret and I had watched countless movies over 40 years, where we had joyfully opened Christmas presents. Sit down, Dad, Dennis ordered, gesturing to my own leather recliner like he was granting me a special privilege to sit in my own home. We've made some important decisions. Victor pulled out a thick, intimidating folder, neat and organized, color-coded tabs, everything looking aggressively official. We've formally consulted with a probate attorney. Given your advanced age and Margaret's recent passing, it makes total logical sense to start protecting assets right now. Avoid massive estate taxes. Minimize probate fees, all very standard elder care planning. We found you an absolutely beautiful senior community in La Jolla. Stephanie added quickly, spinning her laptop around to show me highly edited pictures. All one floor, 3 hot meals included, daily transportation to medical appointments, and activities coordinator. Victor has already arranged the reverse mortgage paperwork. You'll have plenty of cash to pay for the new place, plus some extra spending money left over. Dennis aggressively spread more documents across the coffee table. We're officially listing the house on April 1st, he said. The spring market is the best time to sell in San Diego. Victor's colleague is a top-tier realtor in this specific zip code. She conservatively estimates we'll close within 3 weeks, maybe sooner if we price it aggressively. I looked at them. My son, his girlfriend, his business partner, sitting in the beautiful home Margaret and I had built together, chopping it up into pieces and dividing it out like I was already dead and buried in the ground. "Get out," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, be reasonable," Dennis sighed, using that infuriatingly patronizing tone you'd use with a confused, misbehaving toddler. "Get out of my house right now. We're genuinely trying to help you," Victor said, slowly gathering up his papers like I was just being unnecessarily difficult. "This is completely standard elder care planning. Literally every smart family goes through this exact process." "You're trying to help yourselves to my money," I said, my voice rising. "And you are insulting Margaret's memory. Now get the hell out of my house before I call the police and have all 3 of you forcefully removed for trespassing." Stephanie laughed. She actually threw her head back and laughed. "Richard, you can't possibly call the police on your own family. Dennis has every legal right to be here." "Not anymore, he doesn't," I said, walking straight to the front door and throwing it wide open. "Out, all of you now." They finally left, but not before Dennis turned back at the door, his face a mask of cold fury. "We'll be back when you're thinking more clearly, Dad. This is happening whether you cooperate or not." After they had finally gone and the door clicked shut, I stood completely alone in the silent, empty living room for a very long time. The house felt fundamentally different now, dirty, violated somehow. They had been secretly going through my personal things, arrogantly making life-altering plans for my future, aggressively treating me like an annoying obstacle to be managed rather than a living, breathing person. I slowly walked upstairs to our master bedroom, making my way to the large walk-in closet where Margaret had always kept her most important, sensitive papers. She had always been vastly more organized than me, everything meticulously labeled and filed perfectly in those plain manila folders she bought in bulk from the local office supply store. I found exactly what I was desperately looking for, tucked away on the highest, dustiest top shelf. It was a single manila folder clearly marked for Richard, open after I'm gone, in Margaret's careful, unmistakable cursive handwriting. Inside was a long, detailed letter dated exactly 8 months before her tragic death, written in the vibrant blue ink she always stubbornly used for important, official things. "My dearest Richard," it began, "if you are reading this letter, I am unfortunately gone, and I imagine Dennis is already circling the house like a starving vulture. I am so deeply sorry. I'm not going to be there to see the look on his smug face when you finally tell him the absolute truth. Here is exactly what you need to know, and what you must do." I sat on the edge of our bed and read the multi-page letter 3 times before I fully, truly understood the sheer brilliance of what she had secretly done. Then I meticulously read through all the attached legal documents she had carefully included. Property deeds, massive bank statements, complex trust documents, a strict timeline of necessary steps to take, and a list containing the names and direct phone numbers of highly paid lawyers, accountants, and real estate agents based in Wyoming. Margaret had flawlessly planned everything, every minor detail, every potential contingency. She had seen this exact nightmare scenario coming years before it ever happened, and she had systematically built me a bulletproof escape route that Dennis would absolutely never see coming in a million years. The very next morning, exactly as instructed, I called the first number listed on her sheet, a high-powered estate lawyer named Evelyn Foster, located in Jackson, Wyoming. "Mr. Vance," she said the moment I identified myself, I have been eagerly expecting your call for weeks. Mrs. Vance established the primary trust over 3 years ago. Absolutely everything is ready whenever you give the word. Walk me through it from the beginning, I said, staring at the thick stack of papers. What Margaret had secretly accomplished over the last few years was nothing short of a masterpiece. 4 years ago, when her deteriorating heart condition was first officially diagnosed, she had quietly started planning for my future without her. She knew our son Dennis well enough to accurately predict exactly what he would try to pull the moment she was safely in the ground. The massive ranch we had honeymooned at in Wyoming 45 years ago had originally belonged to her eccentric Uncle Henry. When Uncle Henry passed away 18 years ago, he had legally left the entire property directly to Margaret in his will. It was a sprawling 520-acre ranch nestled deep in the breathtaking Teton Valley, about 40 minutes outside of Jackson. Exactly 3 years ago, Margaret had hired a small army of top-tier contractors to completely gut and renovate the massive main house. They installed a brand-new heavy-duty roof, all-new state-of-the-art plumbing, completely modernized electrical systems, a massive gourmet kitchen, and fully updated luxury bathrooms. She had even had the dilapidated old barn fully converted into a high-end professional photography studio. She had cleverly established a massive ironclad trust, fully funded with the substantial proceeds from quietly selling off some legacy Microsoft stock she had inherited decades ago from her parents. This specific trust was perfectly designed to automatically cover all property taxes, insurance, and routine maintenance for the next 25 years. Then she had set up a second, even more secretive trust. Over the course of 3 long years, she had systematically and gradually transferred money from our massive joint savings account. Small, unnoticeable amounts at a time. $2,000 here, $3,000 there. By the time her heart finally gave out, she had successfully, legally moved a staggering $450,000 straight into that secure Wyoming trust, leaving just barely enough in our regular San Diego accounts to look completely normal to an outside observer like Dennis. But the absolute genius of her plan involved the San Diego house. The house had a massive second mortgage that I absolutely did not know about. Margaret had taken it out quietly 2 years ago for a staggering $180,000. She had used that massive influx of money to completely fund the expensive Wyoming renovations and pad the various trust accounts. The hefty monthly payments were brilliantly set up as automatic withdrawals from a totally separate account I literally never looked at. What this complex web of financial maneuvers meant was beautifully, devastatingly simple for Dennis. The San Diego house that he was so desperately eager to steal from me had almost zero actual equity left in it. Between the massive original mortgage that was still active and the massive second mortgage Margaret had taken out, there was maybe, at best, $60,000 of actual value remaining in the property. Every single other penny of our wealth had been quietly, legally, systematically moved to Wyoming. She left you a permanent way out. Evelyn Foster told me on the phone. You are to formally transfer total ownership of the San Diego house directly to Dennis immediately. Give it to him. Let him have exactly what he has been aggressively asking for. Just give it to him? I said, stunned. Along with both of the massive mortgages? Exactly, Evelyn said. He will immediately become legally responsible for absolutely all the debt attached to the property. The letter from Mrs. Vance suggests you tell him it is his full inheritance being given early. The next 2 weeks required the most careful, convincing acting job of my entire life. I absolutely couldn't let Dennis or his cronies know I was planning anything out of the ordinary. I had to flawlessly play the pathetic part of a grieving, broken widower who was slowly, reluctantly coming around to their aggressive point of view. Dennis called me constantly, every other day, to aggressively check on me. I let my resistance soften very gradually, perfectly playing the victim. Yes, maybe the big house was getting to be far too much for me to handle alone. Yes, maybe a major change of scenery would be incredibly good for my mental health. I actively let him think he was successfully wearing me down. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Tyler and I were furiously packing. We started with just the essentials at first. Clothes, deeply personal items, Margaret's expensive jewelry, irreplaceable family photo albums. Tyler came over every single evening after his day job wrapped up, officially under the clever pretense of simply helping me sort through Margaret's old medical things. "He's really doing this?" Tyler said in disbelief one night as we packed boxes in the basement after I had fully explained what Dennis was aggressively attempting to do. "His own flesh and blood father? He's trying to steal everything you have?" "He really is," I said grimly. And Margaret knew he would try this the moment she was gone. We were incredibly methodical and careful about our secret exodus. We secretly rented a large, climate-controlled storage unit entirely across town, paying in cash, and gradually moved our most valuable things there under the cover of darkness. Margaret's expensive china, the valuable antique furniture that had belonged to my parents, expensive books, valuable artwork. We intentionally left all the big, obvious stuff exactly where it was. The cheap furniture he had grown up with, the old televisions, anything he would immediately notice if it went missing. The closest call came on a sunny Tuesday afternoon in late March. I had just finished loading a heavy box of Margaret's expensive medical textbooks into the covered bed of my truck when Stephanie suddenly pulled into my driveway in her flashy new BMW. "Richard," she called out, practically leaping out of her expensive car with that fake plastic smile she always wore. "Perfect timing. I really wanted to talk to you about the upcoming kitchen remodel." "The kitchen remodel," I repeated, feigning total confusion. "For after you finally move out," she said brightly. "Dennis and I have officially decided to keep the house instead of selling it right away. We think we can use it as a highly lucrative rental property for a few years to build our portfolio. But the kitchen is just so hideously outdated." "You're already planning to completely remodel my kitchen," I said slowly, marveling at her audacity. "Well, it'll officially be our kitchen very soon," she said smugly. "Dennis told me you've basically agreed to the reverse mortgage structure. We're just waiting for you to stop dragging your feet and make it officially legal." I hadn't agreed to a single thing, but I just smiled tightly and nodded. "We're still carefully working out the final details," I said smoothly. But what I didn't tell her, and what they didn't know, was that Victor and Dennis had gotten greedy, extremely greedy. Evelyn Foster had alerted me that they had aggressively attempted to file a fraudulent power of attorney document with my local bank, boldly claiming I was mentally unfit due to grief. This was a massive, fatal mistake on their part. Under California Penal Code Section 470, forging a signature on a financial document of that magnitude is a serious felony. Because the document was entirely forged, it was legally void ab initio, meaning it was completely invalid from the very moment it was created. They had also aggressively prepared a lawsuit claiming dissipation of marital assets, foolishly arguing that Margaret had illegally hidden money from the estate. But Margaret's trusts were ironclad and perfectly legal. They were walking straight into a devastating legal trap, and they were too blinded by greed to see the massive jaws closing around them. The final explosive meeting happened exactly 5 weeks to the day after Margaret's funeral. I had aggressively called the meeting myself, officially telling Dennis I had finally made a firm decision about the house and wanted to formalize everything with everyone involved. He practically sprinted to the house, arriving within an hour, bringing Stephanie and Victor exactly like I had predicted. Tyler was already there, sitting quietly and unassumingly in the corner of the room. "I've thought long and hard about what you said," I told them, slowly settling into my comfortable leather recliner. "About the house being far too big, about making a fresh start. You know what, you're absolutely right. It's definitely time for a massive change." Dennis and Stephanie exchanged massive, victorious glances. "I'm going to officially sign the entire house over to you," I continued, my voice perfectly steady. "Complete ownership transfer via a quitclaim deed. You can legally take full possession immediately today." "That's absolutely wonderful, Dad," Dennis said, practically vibrating with greedy excitement. "This is really the best financial decision for absolutely everyone." "I certainly think so too," I said smoothly. I slowly pulled out the incredibly thick legal folder Evelyn Foster had painstakingly prepared. "The official deed transfer documents are all right here. You'll simply need to sign as well. officially accepting the total transfer and absolutely all associated legal and financial responsibilities. Associated responsibilities? Victor asked, his slimy lawyer instincts finally kicking into gear. The massive property taxes, the extensive homeowner's insurance, both of the massive mortgages, I said casually. All of that legally transfers directly with the deed. Standard procedure in any property transfer, as Victor surely knows, mortgages. Stephanie's plastic smile finally faltered for the very first time. Plural? As in more than one? There's the massive original mortgage, about $220,000 remaining on the principal, I said calmly, and the massive second mortgage Margaret quietly took out 2 years ago for an additional $180,000. I handed the stack of documents across the table. My lawyer explained absolutely everything in these documents. I watched Dennis's smug face go from confused to incredibly pale to violently angry. I watched Victor's perfectly manicured hands start to visibly shake as he frantically flipped through page after page of massive debt obligations. This house has a $400,000 debt attached to it, Dennis said finally, his voice trembling with rage. You explicitly told us it was almost entirely paid off. I absolutely never told you any such thing, I replied calmly. You arrogantly assumed it was paid off. This is absolutely insane, Stephanie said, her voice getting incredibly shrill and panicky. With the massive property taxes and the expensive insurance, this place easily costs $200 a month just to maintain. We absolutely cannot afford that on top of our rent. Then sell it, I suggested helpfully, exactly like you were secretly planning to anyway. Victor was furiously tapping on his expensive calculator, his face red with panic. After massive transfer fees, expensive realtor commissions, and paying off both of these massive mortgages, you'd maybe clear $30,000. Market fluctuations, I said with a careless shrug. Can't ever predict these things, Victor. You said so yourself. Dennis stood up abruptly, his chair scraping violently against the floor. There's something else going on here. Where the hell is the rest of the money? Mom's life insurance payout, the massive joint savings accounts, your extensive retirement funds? The life insurance was $400,000, I said calmly. It fully covered Margaret's incredibly expensive medical bills and the lavish funeral expenses. Every single penny is meticulously accounted for. If you'd like my lawyer to send you the massive stack of receipts. You're not keeping this house either, Dennis said suddenly, his corporate finance brain finally working through the shock. You're taking the money and going somewhere else, smart boy, I said. Far too late, but smart. I'm officially retiring to Wyoming, I said, standing up. I've already fully closed out absolutely all the San Diego bank accounts and legally transferred absolutely everything to secure trusts in Jackson Hole. I'm moving permanently next week. Wyoming? Stephanie shrieked. What the hell is in Wyoming? Margaret and I honeymooned there 45 years ago, I said softly. Seemed like a fitting, peaceful place for a new beginning away from vultures. So you're just dumping a massive debt-ridden house on us and disappearing? Dennis's voice actually cracked, a mix of rage and sheer panic. You're committing elder financial abuse against yourself just to spite us. I'm giving you exactly what you aggressively asked for, I said coldly. The house, your full inheritance given early, just like you desperately wanted. The fact that it's not the massive gold mine you greedily expected is absolutely not my problem. This is massive fraud, Dennis spat. We are going to sue you for dissipation of marital assets. Mom absolutely couldn't have legally moved that much money without your explicit written knowledge. We will drag you through court. She absolutely could, and she absolutely did, I said, my voice turning to ice. Her money, her independent decisions, all perfectly legal, all meticulously documented. Evelyn Foster in Wyoming can gladly send your incompetent lawyer copies of absolutely everything if you want bulletproof proof. And speaking of lawyers, my legal team has fully informed the authorities about the fraudulent power of attorney document you and Victor arrogantly submitted to the bank last week. You forged my signature. That is a direct violation of California Penal Code, Section 470. The document is completely void ab initio, and the police are incredibly interested in speaking with both of you about the felony forgery. Victor physically recoiled, the color draining completely from his face. You knew about that? I know absolutely everything, I said. I stood up, towering over them. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have packing to finish. The professional movers arrive on Monday morning. You can't do this to us, Stephanie cried. We already spent thousands on the remodeled deposits. I already have, I said flatly. Tyler, are you ready? Tyler stood up with a massive grin and picked up the 2 heavy duffel bags I had strategically positioned by the front door. Absolutely ready. Got everything recorded too. Ready? You're taking him? Dennis yelled. Of course you are. You always loved him more. Tyler has been vastly more family to me than you've been in a decade, I said firmly. He's coming with me. The Wyoming ranch has plenty of space. Ranch, Dennis said, his eyes wide. What ranch? But I was entirely done explaining anything to him. Tyler and I proudly walked out the front door of that cursed house for the absolute last time. Behind us, I could clearly hear them immediately starting to viciously fight among themselves. They were trapped in the exact cage they had built for me. How do you feel? Tyler asked softly as we got into my fully packed truck. Free, I said, and for the first time in 6 weeks I actually meant it. The aftermath was exactly as brutal as they deserved. Dennis stubbornly kept the San Diego house for 4 miserable months, desperately trying to find a gullible buyer who would pay enough to make the massive debts worthwhile. He and Stephanie broke up violently after only 6 weeks. Victor was formally indicted for felony forgery and permanently lost his lucrative license to practice law or financial planning. Dennis managed to avoid jail time by turning state's evidence against Victor, but his reputation in the financial sector was permanently destroyed. Eventually, Dennis was forced to sell the house for a measly $480,000, barely enough to pay off both massive mortgages and cover the exorbitant realtor fees. He walked away with less than $2,000 and a credit score absolutely destroyed by 4 long months of violently struggling to make massive mortgage payments he couldn't afford. The massive ranch in Wyoming was absolutely everything Margaret had promised. 520 pristine acres in the gorgeous Teton Valley with towering mountains that looked like something straight out of a Hollywood movie. The newly renovated main house was absolutely breathtaking. Margaret had thoughtfully thought of absolutely everything. The massive kitchen had a professional gas range because she knew I loved to cook. Tyler happily moved into the massive photography studio in the converted barn. Within 2 short months, he had successfully established a booming business photographing magnificent wildlife for national magazines and selling high-end prints to wealthy tourists in Jackson. He was infinitely happier than I had ever seen him in his entire life. I found Margaret's final beautiful letter exactly 6 months later, safely tucked inside her absolute favorite worn cookbook. If you're reading this, you made it. You are finally free. Do not ever feel guilty about Dennis. He made his greedy choices and he earned his fate. Live the beautiful life we always dreamed about. I love you endlessly. A year later, Dennis called my new cell phone number. Dad, I'm so sorry for absolutely everything. Could I please come visit? I thought about it for a long time, about forgiveness, about second chances, about exactly what Margaret would have truly wanted. Call me next week, I said coldly. We'll see. I hung up the phone. The golden sun is setting now over the magnificent Tetons. Tyler is out in his state-of-the-art studio, working on a brilliant new series about wild elk behavior. I'm sitting on the expansive wooden porch Margaret lovingly designed specifically for me, drinking a hot cup of coffee and peacefully watching the massive mountains turn a deep, beautiful purple in the fading evening light. It's a remarkably good life, quiet, honest, simple. Margaret always did know exactly what was best. Sometimes the greedy people who loudly claim to love you the most are really just impatiently waiting for you to die so they can ruthlessly divide up what little is left. But real, true love protects you, even from beyond the grave. The absolute greatest inheritance isn't dirty money or expensive property. It is having a partner who knows you well enough to brilliantly save you from your own greedy family when you are far too heartbroken to save yourself.